of what truly matters, our families. Healthy families make healthy societies. I'm Randy.
And I'm Leslie. We're diving deep into the powerful insights of Dr. Randy's groundbreaking book, The Family Legacy: Shaping Culture from the Inside Out.
Hear inspiring stories and strategies to transform your family. We'll explore topics like communication, forgiveness, healing, parenting, marriage. We'll cover it all.
We'll have provoking conversations with experts, coaches, and real-life families who are benefiting from intentional family building.
This podcast isn't just about theories, it's about tools that you can implement today.
We all come from families, so this podcast is for you.
Join us on this incredible family journey. Subscribe now as we learn to do family as God designed.
Transforming families one episode at a time. Remember, whoever wins the family wins the culture in the end. Let's go.
Welcome back to Transforming Families with Randy and Leslie. I'm Randy.
I'm Leslie.
And we are delighted today to have a really long-time friend. And one of the most, we joked at one time about him being the most interesting man alive. And he really is. He's got a wide range of experience and a heart after God. And it's our family expert segment. And the topic for today's show is restoring the American family. And so we're going to bring in Gordon Pennington. Leslie's going to introduce him and we're going to get after it.
Yes, here we go. Gordon Pennington built his career as a Madison Avenue marketing and branding guru, including his role as director of marketing for Tommy Hilfiger in repositioning the company to go public. He's traveled to 63 nations and been described by the Wall Street Journal as a high-tech traveler in low-tech countries, and by people in the film industry as the Hollywood outsider who has more insider connections than people working in the industry today. Deliverance from high-functioning alcoholism and drug abuse 25 years ago launched him in a new direction, seeking to help others find freedom in the joy of the Lord. Impacting culture for Christ has been his passion for more than 2 decades, and he's been instrumental in establishing some of the most successful missional projects of cultural impact in the 21st century, raising millions of dollars to support these efforts and influencing others to seekers to join the journey with Jesus. In the last year and a half, he's experienced a deep process of personal spiritual renewal and awakening that has led him to a renewed concern and compassion for the lost. People surrounding us who have not yet met Jesus and have never been presented with the gospel. Gordon has led 227 people to Jesus during the 18 months since his reawakening in Christ.
Wow.
Gordon, we are honored to have you with us today.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be with you guys. And I've been excited about your podcast and everything you're doing to restore families. So this is a really exciting opportunity. And thanks for all the hype. I think all that stuff is like grossly exaggerated. And
No.
I'm not an expert at anything except surviving. So that's a starting point, isn't it?
Yeah, you're an expert at receiving the grace of God, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
And that's the best we can hope for some days.
Indeed.
Well, we're going to jump right in. We're very interested. This is our 4th of July podcast, Gordon, and we're bringing a segment today that we're calling Restoring the American Family. And I just wonder if you will just share with us your thoughts about those original families that settled our nation, that came. What was it about them foundationally that, if we say we're going to restore the family, restore them to what?
Yeah, well, look, you know my story. I'm the only child of an only child of an only child, and I have an only child who has an only child. So when it comes to family configuration, I've got one of the strangest linear verticals of just about anybody's genealogy, I suppose. But that's my story. I come from a certain amount of loss and brokenness. I didn't know either of my grandfathers. They had both passed away before I was born. My parents divorced when I was 2. I saw my father once when I was 4, and I never saw my father again until I was in college. My father just turned 99 a few weeks ago. He's still driving, still living independently, still shops, still loves to go around and socialize, still gets the occasional speeding ticket or warnings from the police, who find great fascination in this, and they pull him over, and then they end up wanting to become friends. It's a long story, but my dad is compos mentis, and more than that, his mental acuity is striking. He can quote whole scenes from the plays of Shakespeare that I'm pretty sure he hasn't read since he was in college.
Wow.
But he's a fascinating person, far more interesting than me, I think, in many respects. And I'm just grateful that we've restored our relationship. And I was 51 years old before my father ever said, "I love you, son." And I think that's a meaningful moment in anybody's life. You just want that affirmation. You want to feel valued. You want to feel that connection of affection and affirmation. Anybody does. And some people never get it. Some people never get to hear it. So I feel fortunate in spite of the circumstance. My mother died 12 years ago. I had a wonderful relationship with her that was strengthened in the end because she had a near fatal stroke and she was not expected to live 7 days. Randy, Leslie, you know this story very well. And she lived 7 weeks, then she lived 7 months, and then 7 years. And during that time, she had an unexpected, a miraculous recovery that even her doctor, Dr. Arshad Majid, one of the world's leading stroke neurologists, went on record in saying, "This is a miracle from God." And he said, "I'd never said that before." This is the guy that lectured at the Royal Medical Society, is published in major peer-reviewed medical journals, etc. So I witnessed something and was restored to the heart of my mother in ways I never would have dreamt. Uh, it's easy to get emotional about that because it goes deep in the heart, deep in the psyche, deep in the soul and spirit of any person to be reconnected to a family member. I thought I was connected to my mother. I was connected to my mother, but being reconnected to her during a time of disability and recovery where she was very, very weak, very, very vulnerable, very, very needy was an extraordinary experience. And then now to be restored to my dad, where we rarely end a phone call. We talk frequently, not every day, but almost. And we'll pray together, and my dad will rarely end a call without saying "I love you." So it's just it's a it's a powerful thing, and of course it touches emotions. Now
Yeah.
I know you want to talk about the history of the American family and so on, but you have to start with where you're starting. I
That's
can't tell
good.
you anything about American family except my own American family experience, which is one of again this linear genealogy, that's this single vertical, and then having to pick up pieces of what it means to be a family from other people. Because at one point after my parents divorced, I lived in the house where I'm speaking it from that was built for my great grandparents 112 years ago. And I lived with my parents had divorced. My mother's father had passed away, my grandfather, who I never knew, and my great grandfather still alive. So I lived with one each of four generations of my family here. It was me as a boy up until about age 5, my mother, my grandmother, and my great grandfather. And I have vivid and specific memories of those family interactions. And and a Norwegian maid named Hansi. And I've got stories that I vividly remember about her. When I was 3.5 years old, she picked up an old, one of those loud, big Kirby or Hoover vacuum cleaners and said, "It has the power," with her Norwegian accent, "it has the power to suck you in." And I really believed it. And I stayed away from that woman and that vacuum for a long time. But these are the
Mhm.
funny impressions that shape our childhoods and our family. And fortunately, I did not hear arguing. I heard a very, very peaceful, congenial home life. I never heard fighting, which is really interesting to grow up and have never heard a fight. The flip side of that is I never heard how fathers and mothers and parents reconcile. What is that process of getting over things, of healing and forgiving, of listening, of asking forgiveness? I didn't see that. It was a very different thing. Again, my great grandfather was very old, and as he was approaching his 90s, there was a lot of caregiving, and it was very tender. And I remember a lot of things that you would, as you would imagine, there was a very strong feminine presence in our home growing up, but it didn't. I didn't feel it made my mother didn't want it to make me effeminate. She's very concerned about that. And I could tell you a lot about that. But again, that's just a snapshot of my background and experience of family. And I could tell you a lot more because what's interesting, in addition to that, is my family paid a lot of attention to genealogies. So my mother did a lot of genealogical research back in the 70s, and even before that on my father's side, they're very interested in family connections and their significance to them. And I thought that's interesting that I grew up seeing a lot of family trees and genealogy, but it was absent other facets and attributes of family that I think you and Leslie are seeking to build into families. You can know where you're from and sort of who's who and what's what and what they did and where they came from, but you don't necessarily know. And I did have the good fortune of getting to know more about their personal histories. I'll save that for another time
Yeah.
because I know this is a July 4th broadcast and we're talking about the American family
Yeah.
experience. But that's my American
Thank
family
you.
experience in part.
It's always interesting for us to hear about your family. So thank you for taking the time to do that.
So there's that. Now, what the American family, we talked before we started recording here a little bit about where did American families come from? Well, the first American families were Native American tribes. So let's not forget the fact that this wasn't just colonists coming, discovering the new world as described then. It was Native American tribalism. And what was the sacred and what was the significance of how they lived and survived? And not all was blissful and peaceful amongst Native Americans either. There were tribes that got along and seemed to have histories that were very very peaceful and congenial and adapted to their environments and their circumstances and had a sense of the Great Spirit. I don't know the history. I don't actually know the history of Native American spirituality, except that I have friends who are Native American tribal leaders in the United States today, and I've been really grateful that they've taken time to tell me things that gave me a different perception of what my history classes had taught me growing up in an American public school in the Midwest. And it wasn't always easy. There were conflicts and war, and there were, human beings are subject to a brokenness, which we would assume because we're people of faith here, and our Christian faith
Yeah.
informs us that people are broken in relationship to our Creator and to one another. So, although Native Americans worshiped the Great Spirit as they conceived of him, and again, I couldn't possibly go into any depth or detail to tell you how different theologies or cosmology or what the anthropology of Native American spirituality is, but I think there's a lot to reckon with there because you know, they dealt with the hands that they were given.
Yeah. Yep.
And so you start somewhere. So I think we should never forget the idea that Europeans coming to the United States and discovering the New World brought with them the symptoms of their own broken families. They had one thing in common. They were religious refugees. In a sense, they were
Yeah.
escapees from a religious tyranny.
Yeah.
So you had the Jamestown colony with a whole set of ideas there and assumptions, and you would do well. I've heard, by the way, just in the last couple of months, I've heard some fascinating lectures about what they went through versus what some of the populist or revisionist histories tell us, and that would take up a full hour easily. But I think keeping in mind that they were escaping something and bringing something with them that may have been aspirationally and ideologically compelling, but was it healthy entirely? Were they healthy persons? They were, and again, we know so much about the family histories that we don't know everything. But what fascinates me is how much research has gone into who they were, where they came from, why they came, what their circumstances were. And then you have the Massachusetts colony, a very different set of circumstances. The Pilgrims were very different than the settlers, and how they dealt with life and what they learned as colonists in both cases was very very interesting. And again, it would be misleading for me to start down that trail because I'd simply be repeating things that are somewhat new to me in terms of my own understanding. I haven't conducted much research into the idea uh, that these were basically English colonists coming here again to escape religious persecution and bring ideas of what they felt would be a more idealistic way to express their faith and their values and their ideals. It didn't always work out that way. But again, what you learn along the way has a great deal to do with how you adapt and how you pivot and understand yourself and the circumstances which challenge them to the very core of their existence, getting through very, very severe and formidable conditions with the assistance and sometimes conflict of the Native Americans there. So that would be in itself a fascinating conversation. But where I pick it up, and please jump in here. I don't mean to make this entirely
Yeah, here I'm
a
going to go jump
soliloquy.
to a break. I want to jump to a break real quick. When we come back, maybe you could talk about the founders of our country and some of the strengths that they had, from a Judeo-Christian foundation, because I think that's what really launched the American experiment to what it became. And now some things have happened where it's not such that great thing. We want to talk about that too. And ultimately, what do we do to fix this? And but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this with Gordon Pennington.
Disconnected from your spouse or children? Do you want to create a home filled with love, joy, and purpose? In this fast-paced, crazy world, it's easy to lose sight of what truly matters: your family. The Family School is here to guide you on this incredible journey based on Dr. Randall Bixby's best-selling book, The Family Legacy: Shaping Culture from the Inside Out.
The Family School provided us with the tools and strategies to build a healthy family culture. It's amazing to experience the transformation.
The Family School is a game changer. Our communication has improved, along with our ability to forgive and stay connected. We now have a blueprint to raise our son and teach him how to lead his own family one day.
The support and community at the Family School are incredible. We're not alone in this journey.
Family School has impacted our family relationally by transforming how we interact with each other, improving our communication skills to create a safe environment for everyone to be open and fully themselves.
At the Family School, you'll discover biblical strategies, practical tools, and a supportive community that will empower your family to thrive.
Enroll in the Family School today and embark on a life-changing adventure. Through interactive classes, personalized coaching, and transformative resources, you'll learn practical techniques to heal, grow, and thrive as you build your family in God's design. Visit our website at www.thefamilyreformationproject.com. Start shaping your family's legacy now.
Join the Family School today. Learn to do family by design.
All right, we're back. Transforming Families with Randy and Les. We're here with Gordon Pennington today, and we're talking about the restoration of the American family. So we got all the way basically up to the founders. Take us away there.
Well, I don't think we quite got to the founders. We got to the Pilgrims and the early settlers. The founders are a whole, in a sense, are a whole different cast of characters because, once again, they were already settled here. They were colonists, and they were operating in a structure that was much more developed than anything the Pilgrims had, or the earliest settlers. So by the time we get to the 1700s, and we're looking at the mid to late 18th century, we're looking at people who were beginning to question what their identity was and could be in relationship to the British Crown. And when you think about what took place there and the genius, in a sense, of what they conceived in liberty, a new nation, and dedicated to the proposition all men are created equal. I mean, it was very, very ambitious. It was rooted in the idea that they had really studied history in a very practical way, and they understood natural law, and they understood the nature of human beings, and they really understood what the conditions were that would afflict and affect anybody trying to create a new nation. And this new nation was, as you said earlier, you referenced the experiment in democracy. Well, every nation is an experiment of some kind, and every life is an experiment of some kind, if you like. And you can't control all of the externals, all the other conditions, but you can observe what is happening to us individually and as a society. And I would submit to you, since the beginning of this new nation, we have studied ourselves perhaps more than any other nation. What do I mean by that? Because of the influence of educational institutions here, they've really taken a keen look at anthropology and the nature of human relationships and human groups. There are three facets of the family. There's the genetic facet of the family, and then there's the domestic facet, which is a socioeconomic facet of function and survival, frankly, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you think about Maslow's hierarchy. I mean, the five layers in that leading to self-actualization. Well, that's applied to the individual, but it's also applied through community and a sense of, first of all, survival, then safety, and then community, and then thriving together in that sense of education, reaching the point of self-actualization. What if we had an idea of what family actualization looked like, the optimal self-realization, self-actualization of groups of people? And what sadly happened here in the American experiment, I think I'm going fast forward, and I'll go back again because I think this is prefaced on something else. But the idea now that we're in the sort of me generation that began in the, maybe the foment began in the 60s, the 70s. Again, I'm not an anthropologist, but I think we've studied ourselves as a society so closely. We're now in these sort of algorithmic, series of AI and machine learning, and all of the things that we're subject to are really studying us. We're our own laboratory rats, in a sense. We're studying ourselves to basically optimize ourselves or be optimized by others who have a greater level of information and control of that information, and give us the bits and pieces of things we generally want to hear that incentivize us, or really control us. I mean, there's two schools of thought there generally, and it's dystopian. Huxley and Orwell. But go back to the idea of what the family is based on. The American family wasn't perfect. Nothing's ever quite perfect, but this is, we live in a beautiful but broken world. So how do we recognize beauty, celebrate the good, the true, and the beautiful, and then recognize we have brokenness to deal with? And it has to start with each individual saying, where am I broken? Where are my blind spots? What am I failing at? How is it affecting others? And where do we start? So I think what you're trying to do in terms of awakening people as groups, as families, has to start with the individual. And then it has to go into another different a set of applications, how we see ourselves in groups. I will say one thing. I've been wanting, you and I've discussed this, Randy, and Leslie too, over the years. I think because I've come from a broken family, and the divorce rates in the United States are approaching, or we've really got to understand how to incorporate people that come from brokenness and want to find a sense of inclusiveness, want to find a sense of identity, want to find a sense of belonging, want to find a sense of community, want to find a sense of affection, want to find a sense of mutual benefit, and deep, intimate connections that are rooted in trust and rooted in affection. And you don't always get that just because you're born into the genetics of a family or adopted into a family or your foster care. We're surrounded by people with all kinds of stories and backgrounds that we may or may not be able to relate to. I'm always fascinated by the ability to celebrate people who come from healthy families by whatever measures. And I've actually been jealous or envious of people who had that, because I didn't have a horrible family life, but I didn't have a whole family life. And so actually going back to my dad would call me once a year on my birthday and basically interrogate me. That's the whole story. But how did the American family take its shape? It took its shape because, again, we're refugees, we're pilgrims, we're sojourners, we're settlers, and we're hard scrabble people. We came from other societies who were far more developed. Not many of us came from societies where we were at the epoch of or the apogee of our own social development. We weren't necessarily the elites. A few British elites came, but mostly people were trying to find a better life away from the influence of the crown. Now, people had to govern and rule on behalf of King George, and so they came. And if you look at Williamsburg, pre-colonial Williamsburg, before the Revolution, it was a beautiful, well-ordered society with an extraordinary level of understanding of what the socioeconomics of that could look like. And it was deeply rooted in faith and the idea that we've discussed many times, where the Judeo-Christian ethic or ethos or morality. And it's interesting to note that whether people were actually Christians or not, whether they were actually born again or not, whether they actually had a spiritual rebirth or not, they were at least familiar with the Bible. Why? It was the most published and widely distributed piece of literature in the colonies. And other bits and pieces of literature came along, but when it comes to distribution of literature, there were Bible societies that came along, and others who wanted to make sure that this new society of colonists was at least familiar with the ethos and the ideas and the stories surrounding the biblical literature. And by the way, it was considered the queen of sciences, along with, from the from the Italian Renaissance, from the low Renaissance with its humanism, and the high Renaissance, the Northern Renaissance under Luther, and its theology. Theology itself was the queen, more than medicine, and more than philosophy, was theology. It was regarded that highly. So people had a respect for God. And this is, of course, all taking place before the French Revolution, before the French Enlightenment came along and questioned a lot of ideas. And Darwin comes along and questions things, by the way, with a lot of speculation and not scientific proof in the geology and a lot of other matters that were taken for granted and accepted philosophically without science to back it up. So go back to the idea that we're a scattershot bunch of people. We're leaving something for the hope of a better world, and it's very tough in the U.S. For the most part. You get away from Virginia and you get away from the East Coast, and people want a better life, and so they're carving that out from really hard scrabble circumstances, and it produces people of a unique character and ambition and resilience. And I think that's the American family. But they had a sense of fair play. They had a sense of morality. They had a sense of ethics. They had a sense of right and wrong. Where did it come from? The Bible exclusively.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying there weren't any other discussions going on or people hadn't been subjected later on to the influence of the French Enlightenment and other ideas that came along. But something took root in the American experiment that was deeply founded upon the faith of our fathers, our forefathers, and our founders. Now, they weren't all deeply Christian. Many of them were deists, and we've had that discussion. But for the most part, they were familiar with, even the deists were familiar with the Bible, whether they accepted it in whole cloth or not. We look at Jefferson's version of the Bible without the miraculous. The deist version of God as a watchmaker. He winds it up, and we're here to take care of it through logic and reason. But people were at least familiar with right, wrong, good and evil. Whether they acted upon that in all cases, of course not, because they're sinners.
Yeah.
So there had to be some kind of process whereby we were constantly brought back to a plumb line of truth, a plumb line of earnestness and honesty, a plumb line of repentance and renewing our
Yeah.
minds. And so as it goes along, you think about the British coming again. When you think about the Methodists coming here, the Wesley comes here. He's called Methodist partly in mockery because his Christianity was subject to a set of disciplines and methods that were different than anyone had seen at Oxford or afterward. And he applied that to his life with a great passion and conviction. George Whitefield comes across and preaches to more people in more places, in more pulpits, in more circumstances than anyone in American history. So what did he do? He planted the fear of God. He planted conviction in people. People had a real sense that their lives had a purpose that was rooted in their creator. And this was widespread. I can't tell you it was 80 or 90% of people, but at least 80% of homes that had any literature in them had the Bible in them.
So Gordon, thank you so much for that lesson. And what I really heard there as you were sharing toward the end was we're a ragtag bunch of people that just kept going and didn't quit. And if it wouldn't have been for the intrusion of love by God and the great awakenings and sending great evangelists and a revival and a rebirth, that we'd be in a whole lot worse shape than we are right now. But as we look at where we're at right now, families are divided. Families are really seriously broken. We've got so many issues in culture that we believe are because of the fall and the demise of the family. We believe and teach that the culture is downstream from family, that as goes the family, so goes the culture. And so as we come in to the last few moments here today, what's your message about how do we get back to God's design for family from the current state that we're in our country?
These are great questions, Randy, and we discussed this in Arizona a few months ago, and I thought your insights were really profound on the nature of family origin. I believe that we need another spiritual awakening. Nothing's going to fix the family except we fix our souls and receive basically the repair and healing that only God can offer us.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I think we have to understand how we relate to one another. What's happened with the acceleration of technology that's in our hands that we're even using right now is less conjoining and more isolationism. So I believe that what we do is we repair to these devices that give us something we think we want or need that distracts and gives us a largely superficial fix. But what we really need is intimacy with our Creator and one another. And the only way back is going to be to take a good, hard, determined look at how subject we are to all the tools and devices that basically fragment us, disintegrative. And we've got to reintegrate. If we're going to reintegrate the family, it's going to take some very, very calculated and courageous measures about how we allow the world and its culture to shape us. If the culture is downstream from the family, then we got to take a look at what the culture is doing it because it's permeating families. And this is going to take real courage and real spiritual fortitude.
Yes. Yeah. It's transformation from the inside out. It is really every individual getting into right relationship with God and with his design, and then teaching our generations to live that way and taking personal responsibility to make it so in my family, in my generations, and so much more. Well, we're going to have a part 2 podcast with Gordon, and he's going to share more about his journey over the last 18 months or so about this very thing, restoring people back to God. And he's led over 200 people to the Lord, and that's not a notch on a belt. I know that is a calling and something that has deeply, deeply shaped him and those that he's reaching out to. But that's it for today. Any last words?
Remember, whoever wins the family
wins the culture in the end. We'll see you next time. That wraps up another inspiring episode of Transforming Families with Randy and Leslie. We hope that today's conversation has left you feeling empowered and equipped to take action.
Remember, transforming families begins with transforming ourselves. Let's be intentional, loving, and persevere. You're not alone. We're right here with you.
We believe Proverbs 24:3. Wise people are builders. They build families, businesses, and communities. Through intelligence and insight, their enterprises are established and endure.
Thanks for joining us today. We encourage you to stay connected with us on social media, join our email list, and learn more about our resources and classes at the Family School by visiting thefamilyreformationproject.com.
Remember to subscribe, share with your loved ones, and spread the word about transforming families. We'll see you on our next episode. And remember, whoever wins the family wins the culture.